In this part of the course, we're going to focus on core productivity metrics, the basics of measuring productivity. For this, we will look at the first two of our 6 key outputs: gross value added, GVA per hour worked, and GVA per job. In part 3, we will go on to look at the following 4 key outputs, which are all indicators of productivity. For each of these, we will outline why you'd want to measure this, how you calculate it, and what some of the best ways to present the data are.
All the data is sourced from the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, either through the NOMIS portal or, where this is not possible, directly through their website. We'll introduce these as we go.
GVA per hour worked is the purest measure of labour productivity. It is a key headline figure which gives you a strong initial insight into your area's economy in terms of productivity, both in absolute terms and relative to other areas.
There are, however, 2 drawbacks. First, GVA per hour worked data is not available by sector, so this chart can only be used to analyse the productivity of the local economy overall. Second, GVA per hour worked data is not available at some lower level geographies. It's available for the UK and its constituent nations, for English regions and local enterprise partnerships, and for all statistical regions down to the NUTS 3 level. This means GVA per hour worked might not be available at the local authority level, county or district, unless the local authority corresponds to an NUTS 3 statistical region. For reference, only roughly 20% of districts in Great Britain correspond to NUTS 3 statistical regions. The same applies to just over half of English counties. In all other areas, NUTS 3 regions correspond to groups of different local authorities.
To access the GVA per hour worked data, you will need to go direct to the Office of National Statistics website. A link to the relevant page for LEP, city region and NUTS statistical areas is provided in the references alongside this module. You may want to mix and match data from each of these tables to give relevant comparators. We recommend you use table A3, which gives smooth value for GVA per hour worked. This helps reduce the impact of unusual measurements on the final data, giving a more realistic, smoother path of productivity change.
You will note that these values are not adjusted for inflation. We therefore need to use a deflator to get back to 2018 values. If we don't do this, then we'll end up exaggerating the growth of productivity over time. The best ONS dataset to use for this can be found by searching MNX5 on the ONS website. A link is also included in the references.
If you filter this for years and download for 2004 to 2017, we will get deflators to match the period of our data. Click Filtered Time Series and .xls to download it.
You would then paste this into your GVA per hour spreadsheet and divide all values by that year's deflator. Then multiply by 100 to get values in 2018 terms. You can see that before doing this, it looks like productivity has grown strongly. After doing it, the growth is more muted. Some of what looked like growth in the nominal figures was, in fact, just due to the effects of inflation.
Having pulled all this together, we can then present how GVA per hour worked has changed over time. This is an example showing a comparison both within an area and against other areas. Because the local authorities which constitute the Cheshire and Warrington LEP, Cheshire East, Cheshire West and Chester and Warrington are all NUTS 3 regions, we are able to give the breakdown at this level. But note, this will not always be possible. We then compare to wider geographies. In this case, the North West and the UK, and to key comparators. In this case, we've compared the Cheshire and Warrington LEP area economy to the Greater Manchester and the Enterprise M3 LEP area economies, as these are helpful comparisons for understanding the local economy.
This allows us to bring out some interesting insights. Productivity across the LEP at the end of the period is similar to what it was at the start. Note, if we hadn't deflated the figures for inflation, it would have looked like it increased. But the picture is not uniform across the LEP. Cheshire East in particular has grown at a faster rate than the other local authorities within the LEP area. We can also see that the Cheshire and Warrington LEP area has had higher productivity than wider geographies, the North West and the UK, across the whole time period. But we can also see that the Enterprise M3 LEP area, in turn, has a high level of productivity.
We now move on to our other key productivity metric, GVA per job. As noted in Part 1, this is a less than perfect measure of productivity. However, it has two advantages over GVA per hour. Firstly, it allows for comparison across sectors, and secondly, it can be useful for looking at lower levels of geography. It can, for instance, be used for every local authority district.
We need two sets of data to make the calculation: GVA by sector, which is available from the ONS website, and employment, which is available from the NOMIS portal. For the first, you'll need to find the ONS dataset Regional Gross Value Added Balanced Local Authorities by NUTS1 region. A link is included in the references. You'll then need to download the relevant spreadsheet for whichever region of the UK your area is in. Open this up and you'll see the first tab, Information, gives you general information about the content and source of the dataset. The remaining three tabs provide different datasets. You're interested in the dataset on the third tab, called CVM Pounds. Because this data is all given in constant 2016 values, there is no need to deflate this later on.
You will need to enable editing and then filter for a local authority, Lichfield in this case. Then filter the data in column D for sections. Here you should select A, B, D, E, C, and then every other individual letter. You'll be able to see you've got this right by the fact that every row is in the same shade of blue. To aggregate up to the LEP level will require summing up different local authorities.
For the second part, jobs, you can use the dedicated NOMIS portal. You can use NOMIS to download a lot of different ONS data, as we'll see in Part 3. We'll talk through how to use NOMIS in detail here.
To access NOMIS, go to nomisweb.co.uk. The link is included in the references. Once here, click Data Downloads, then Query Data. This takes you to a list of data sets you can query using the portal.
Figures for jobs are accessed through the Business Register and Employment Survey, or BRES. You'll see there are options for open access and safeguarded access. The safeguarded access gives you more accurate data, but you need to get an end-user license from the ONS. If you work for a local authority, university or any research institution, you're entitled to have access to safeguarded data, but you'll need to create a NOMIS account and make a data request by filling in an online form. You also need to be careful with how you use and publish the safeguarded data. For now, we'll stick to open access.
First, click on Geography. Let us continue to use Lichfield as an example. We'll need to use Local Authorities District Unitary. Then select West Midlands, then Lichfield. We then move on to date. It is possible to look at multiple dates, but for now, let's just use 2017, the same year as the GVA data. The next option is employment status. Here you can choose between employment or full-time, part-time or total employees. We recommend selecting employment because it is a more accurate measure of the total number of jobs in an area. An employee might have more than one job. Note that this means changing the default selection.
Then we look at industry. It's possible to get employment data for very detailed subsectors, the most detailed level being SIC 5. We'll revisit this when we look at employment specialisms. For now, though, we want to use broad industrial groups, as these match the GVA data we have. You'll see these have letters after them, which match those which we saw for the GVA numbers. Click Tick All. We can now jump to the bottom and click Download Data. Opening this up, we then have a total number of jobs for each of these broad sectors. The next step will be to sum these up so they correspond to the groupings in the GVA data. For example, adding up the employment for motor trades, wholesale and retail, which all make up Group G.
Once this is done, we can divide the GVA figures by the number of jobs to get the GVA per job. This allows us to list each sector according to how productive jobs in that sector are. The real estate sector is normally the most productive, as profits from renting and selling property are very high relative to the number of people who work in that sector. We can also repeat the process for Great Britain as a whole to give a comparison, helping us to see which sectors are significantly more or less productive than the national average. Please note, it is not possible to do this relative to the whole of the UK, as BRES does not provide job numbers for Northern Ireland. This will inform thinking around where interventions should be targeted in the local industrial strategy.
In this video, we've seen how we can measure core productivity metrics, GVA per hour and GVA per job in different sectors. In the next and final part, we'll consider some other indicators which will help us understand what is driving productivity locally.